Hi, I'm Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research, and this is the Wayward Sons Book Group. Tonight, we will be exploring topics including the NICAP Board of Directors, Bill Moore and the infamous MJ-12. We might take a sidebar into history of the USS Nimitz, and time permitting, we'll even be exploring some letters exchanged between former Director of Central Intelligence and NICAP Chairman of the Board, Roscoe Hillenkoetter, and skeptical Harvard astronomer Donald Menzel. Lots on tap tonight, and lots that will give me more opportunities to express how over NICAP leadership I am and their perpetual claims that they were interested in truth seeking and transparency. But I'm inserting my personal opinion and research findings there. But before we launch into Chapter 8 of Wayward Sons, NICAP, and the IC, I wanted to speak to the panel a bit and talk to y'all about some of your recent activities and goings-ons. And let's start with Tanner Boyle, a man who is just back from England and has lots going on. Tell us give us a summary of what took place across the pond, Tanner.
Oh, more took place across the pond than I could probably distill. It was a very busy 2 weeks. It's great to see my wife again, obviously. Uh, but I also had a talk with Mark Pilkington, friend of the channel. We screened a film about the Unarius contactee group, which we both kind of felt was the platonic ideal of a contactee group, in that it didn't seem like it negatively affected that many of the members, and it didn't turn out to be like a weird racist group, really. It was just camp for the most part. But yeah, toured a bunch of bookstores. Still feel a little unreal being back in the States. That post-vacation feeling.
And you'll be speaking at a UFO event soon, right?
Yeah, so there's a new Pittsburgh UFO club started by Timothy Grieve Carlson, who's like a religious scholar at Westminster College, and he's starting a UFO group that's a bit more, I would say, discerning of, it's more interested in the fun, cool, but also slightly wary of certain elements in ufology. So I think that'll be interesting. It'll be fun to see how it goes.
Thank you. And for those of you watching and listening online, be sure and check the YouTube video description, where I will have links to the various things we referenced tonight, including, for instance, Tanner's popular blog, Getting Spooked, and a summary he gives of his trip to England and upcoming speaking engagement, among other things. I'd also like to ask Alison to speak a little, please, about her recent essay that was published. Tell us about that, please, Alison.
Thank you, Jack. I wrote an essay about on a disability Substack from a friend of mine. About I have Lyme disease, so it's about that, and May is Lyme Disease Awareness Month. So, yeah.
Thank you, and I wholeheartedly support your efforts to heal, as well as support others with hidden disabilities. and the public activism you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
And Jeff Knox, when he's not downloading Air Force and FBI records and making them searchable, is the man about town and just visited a UFO conference, right, Jeff?
Yep. So I had the opportunity to go down to McMinnville for their annual UFO Fest. I've been there several times before, but it's been a few years. 2023 is the last time I had the opportunity to go down there. But I went down there, bad back and all, walking like a cripple, barely able to move, but I did it, and checked out this UFO Fest. I just mentioned a couple of main things. I guess one of the big events was this whistleblower event with George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell on Friday night. And it was sold out. There's a lot of people that came from all around just to go to that one event. Whistleblower turned out to be Dylan Borland, who was one of these people that had spoken at one of these previous conferences. However, he didn't really have much to say. He basically gave a Glomar response to everything Corbell would say. So Corbell would try to leak out a little information, supposedly, and he'd say, well, I can't confirm or deny that unless I'm given amnesty. And Corbell would say some other stuff, and he'd repeat the same thing again. And that was pretty much the whistleblower event that, you know, people paid $60 or $65 or whatever to go to on Friday night. On Saturday night, they had the big parade event, which I went to. I took some pictures where they have the speakers basically on golf carts that they kind of present at the front of the parade. I was able to snap a couple of shots. For some reason, Jeremy Corbell was late. He wasn't with the rest of the speakers. He came zooming by on his golf cart trying to catch up so fast. All I could catch was his name tag. Didn't even get a picture of him on the golf cart. I don't know where he was, but it was a pretty fun parade. The parade's always a big event for the town. This is really this festival is more of a like a tourism thing for the town than it is per se a more serious kind of a UFO conference. As far as there are serious UFO conferences, I guess, these days. I did go to one interesting lecture that was really completely unrelated to UFOs that was given after the parade on Saturday. It was by Rebecca Charbonneau, and she's a historian, I guess, for the SETI Institute. And she gave a lecture on SETI and the Cold War. And I guess she has a book called Mixed Signals. It's kind of about SETI and the Cold War as well. And so that was pretty interesting. I always like it when they at least have something that's not too out there. Certainly better than the guy they had at the beginning of that day, which was some Jason Martell, Ancient Aliens guy, talking about the Anunnaki or some nonsense that I did not attend that one, so I can't speak to that one. But it was a fun but interesting event. I don't know that I'm any smarter for attending, but it is nice to get out there and meet people and see what's going on in UFO culture land.
Yeah, you definitely get a different flavor by being boots on the ground as compared to reading or hearing about it. And it's a sociologist's gold mine. It really is. If you're wanting to watch people and the different issues and things like that. Yeah, so thank you for bringing us up to date.
Yeah, it's fascinating just sitting there in the audience, waiting for the lectures, listening to the people around you talk about what they're talking about. Like you got one guy over here explaining Bob Lazar to some other lady over here, and another guy talking about some video that he saw on News Nation over here. And you just you get to listen and just kind of like a fly on the wall, hear what the other people in this topic are kind of like into. And unfortunately, it's a lot of credulous nonsense from what I observed, but it is what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there a what is the demographic, just sort of average demographic of people that are there?
So This one is pretty widespread, actually. When I would go to UFO conferences in years past, it was almost entirely retired people and people that were older, and it makes sense because it costs a lot of money to travel to a conference. You got to shell out for travel, hotel, tickets. It's not cheap. It's like thousands of dollars to go to a conference. This one, because it's kind of more of a tourism thing, you get a lot of families, particularly on Saturday, that come out. And even in the lecture hall, there's quite a lot of younger people as well as older people. But, you know, there is still, I'd say there's still a significant, at least for the people that are more like professionally involved in the topic, like the people running the booths and like the MUFON individuals, there's still a significant age gap. They tend to be like retired people and people up there in age.
And this was McManus UFO Festival, right? And was that
McMinnville runs it, and it's the McMinnville UFO Festival celebrating the Paul and Evelyn Trent McMinnville photo taken back in 1950.
Right, right.
It's funny, Jeff, because you were just talking about Borland given the Glomar response, and we were literally just talking at the last show in the intro about the Glomar response, and I had made the joke about how, you know, the alleged whistleblowers and disclosure advocates are the ones that give the Glomar response more than the government does these days. And now here we are, very next week. Perfect example.
And of course, just giving it acted as confirmation for the believers out there. So him just saying that, he might as well said, yes, I can confirm that to the people that were listening.
Right.
I can't confirm that means I can confirm that, right?
Right, right. Steve, I had a chance to listen in to some of your appearance, your interview recently, and it sounded like you were doing a good job promoting critical thinking skills. Tell us some about how that went, please.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jack. I'm really glad that you liked it, that you found it worthwhile. Yeah, had a great conversation last week with UFO intros, and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, just trying to spread the message of objectivity and prioritization of verifiable evidence, you know, the best I can. And I tried to make the argument that even if just to try something different, right? If what we've been doing for the past 80 years has brought us this, which I think everyone would agree is disappointing, maybe, just maybe, we could try doing it the other way and just see if we get different results, you know? But yeah, thanks, Jack. I'm glad that you caught it. Appreciate that.
I listened as well, and your analysis or the what you were offering and discussing could have been taken and applied to most any other topic as far as logical thinking and how to approach something you want to study. So I did not understand some of the details, but the broad recommendations that you were making were very, very good.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's one of the things I try and point out too, that I'm so grateful for my experience in the topic and for finding people like Jack, who really helped me realize how low my discernment was, you know, not just in this topic, but across the board, and how low my standard of evidence was. And even as a relatively educated adult, I still was going with my gut, and the arguments from authority were so convincing. And I'm just grateful for going through the experience, because it's it's made my life so much richer in all areas when it comes to discerning information, especially, you know, politics, mass media, all that kind of stuff.
Amen. And we don't know till we know. I mean, we all have to find some mentors or teachers or good sources and learn these kinds of things.
Jeff is not the only man on the streets these days here in the group. I also was traveling recently and hit a few UFO hotspots a couple weeks ago. My wife and I went out on a trip out west, really to go see some national parks and Vegas and stuff. But of course, I had to hit some UFO spots along the way. And as we were driving past Pahrump, I stopped at the old Art Bell compound, and saw, where all those shows were beaming out from in the 90s, as I laid awake as a young child, having my thoughts and opinions shaped every minute. So it was cool to see that, and stop by his grave on the way out of town and paid my respects. But it was a cool experience. I also we stayed in 29 Palms because we were checking out Joshua Tree. And I actually caught a cool UFO photo. I sent it to Jeremy Corbell, but I haven't heard back yet. But I may be in the money. So fingers crossed.
There you go. Lottery ticket.
Right. Hope we can only hope, Jack.
Right.
And then finally, I went to stop at what was the most exciting one for me, in fact, at Giant Rock, because we were literally driving right by. And here I had come all this way, thousands of miles essentially, and we got there, and the Megatron was closed on Wednesdays, which was, I think, the day that we were there, the only day of the week. And then I figured, well, let's drive out to Giant Rock at least. And I didn't realize that it was like 5 miles of completely unpaved sandy roads.
Oh, wow.
And so about half a mile in and a half an hour later, I decided, you know what, this might not be the smartest thing to do with a rental at 5 o'clock in the middle of the desert. So, a mile and a half from the destination, we had to turn around. Didn't get there, but it was interesting nonetheless. It was cool to be in the area. And it's funny because, looking back at all the pictures and the massive gatherings that they had there at Giant Rock, it's interesting to think that there's just not even a paved road that goes there. Yeah.
That is interesting. I think, in the 50s and 60s, that was probably more common, of course, than it is now. But it is interesting. And yeah, you didn't make it in, but you did make it out. And that was the more important part.
My wife would not have been very happy had we gotten stuck in the sand or hit a rock with a flat.
Absolutely.
Now it's covered in graffiti and it's full of litter and beer bottles that, because people go out there and they party and they drink and they just throw all the trash, like they wedge it in underneath the rock area. It was filled in, like there used to be that house underneath it, but they filled that in, a long time ago. And it's cracked, of course, now because a bunch of kids, I think in the 80s or something, were partying and lit a fire underneath it, and it caused a heat fracture and caused the rock to crack open. So now it's cracked, but I've been out there a few times. I've stayed the night out there. Didn't see any flying saucers or UFOs though, unfortunately.
Wow.
Well, even as we were going there down this dirt path at five miles an hour, there were 2 instances of kids literally flying past me at 40 miles an hour with like little Honda Accords. Like I don't even know how they did it. And I looked at my wife. I was like, "Is it me? Am I just being an old, humdrum here?"
Well, with that, we will start chapter 8. Do we have a volunteer to read first?
I can read as penance for missing a few sessions.
Thank you, Tanner. Appreciate it.
And we're starting at the front of chapter 8.
Yes, sir, we sure are.
Chapter 8, Mixed Messages. When Major Donald Kehoe took the NICAP reins in January 1957, he wasted no time promoting the statements of distinguished board members and adding qualified voices to NICAP panels. While the organization was often plagued with financial shortcomings and deserved some criticism in certain areas, the experience and prestige of high-profile supporters was a prominent characteristic that should not be overlooked. NICAP assembled an impressive group of flag wavers, even in comparison to future UFO groups. Some of the motives might be questioned at times, but NICAP was irrefutably well connected. A description of the Board of Governors during the Kehoe years per Richard Hall is pictured below and on screen, I think.
Right.
Kehoe and his NICAP colleagues consistently landed high-profile supporters and coverage from leading newscasts, magazines, and newspapers. Lengthy lists of advisors were compiled in addition to the names populating the Board of Governors. Career intelligence personnel joined the ranks, and many well-known personalities promoted NICAP. A host of military officials, along with renowned psychiatrist Carl Jung and Senator Barry Goldwater, were among those lending their names to the organization's flyers and brochures. Flying saucers, unidentified flying objects, or whatever you call them, are real, Senator Goldwater was quoted by NICAP. Likewise, Dr. Jung was described in NICAP literature as writing a letter to Major Kehoe containing the remarks, "I am a NICAP subscriber. I am grateful for all the courageous things you have done in elucidating the thorny problems of UFO reality. I do not possess sufficient evidence which would enable me to draw definite conclusions. The evidence available, however, is convincing enough to arouse a continuous and fervent interest. If it is true that the AAF, American Air Force, withholds telltale facts, then one can only say this is the most unpsychological and stupid policy one could invent. The public ought to be told the truth." Rear Admiral Delmer Fahrney was a 30-year Navy veteran, graduate of the Naval Academy. As was the case with Hillenkoetter, he was a classmate of Kehoe's at Annapolis, as Richard Hall wrote. Fahrney earned a Bachelor of Science from the Naval Academy and a Master of Science from MIT. The Admiral was an aeronautical engineer and an expert in radio-controlled aircraft, earning him the title the Father of Guided Missiles. He also served as the first NICAP Chairman of the Board of Governors. Fahrney's UFO-related statements, as distributed in NICAP literature, are shown on the opposing page. And on screen, sorry.
Sure. Thank you.
Some readers might note the similarities between the Admiral's remarks and those of future high-profile figures in the UFO genre, most certainly including more current-day trendsetters. The "it's not one of ours" theme seems to particularly get a lot of mileage, in spite of what educated science advocates and intelligence officials should know about differentiating between what people saw and what people say they saw.
Thanks, Tanner. Let's hang on there a minute, please. Thanks for reading. I wanted to explore some of this that Kehoe and NICAP and Fahrney published, his pro-UFO statements. As you can go through NICAP literature and find lots of these types of statements from military men, academics, religious scholars and clergymen, lots of different community leaders. Something I wanted to particularly look at here, though, is note there at the end where Fahrney says, or is quoted with saying, "General Albert C. Wedemeyer will serve the committee as evaluations advisor, and complete analyses will be arranged through leading scientists. After careful evaluation, we shall release our findings to the public." It's amazing how much turmoil this group went through as quickly as it did. Not only was Fahrney going to jump ship in the first weeks of NICAP, but one of the first bulletins that went out carried this message. July 1957, so half a year in, they informed the readers that the advisor panel replaced General Wedemeyer. And it says for reasons that included, the general said he had never intended for the former management to make his name public. This was something that researcher and writer James Carrion came across and sent to me because he knew of my interest in NICAP and my research. And we have some information at the Expanding Frontiers Research blog about these periodicals, and the links are included. And this is extremely interesting to me that this is one of the things I was alluding to when I started and was kind of joking around about I am so over these guys claiming to be about transparency and truth seeking. They ended up having some congressmen point this out to them as well, them being NICAP and Kehoe, that the hypocrisy was astounding of demanding government disclosure of records while behaving in manners like this. General Wedemeyer was an influential career intelligence officer. He sat on multiple presidential advisory committees. He was awarded a Medal of Freedom in 1985. He worked with Gordon Gray, who was an attorney and intelligence officer who headed up the first CIA Psychological Strategy Board in 1950. And that was under General Smith's CIA. He was the director at the time. And you'll recall that that would be the Office of Policy Coordination, the OPC people, and that was the guys that were doing all the coups, the political assassination and assassination attempts around the world, as explored in a book we're reading in Sharon Brown's book club, Den of Spies by Craig Unger. He goes into a lot of 1950s CIA activity surrounding the Iranian coup, and he touches on Guatemala, and that we've taken a look at here. And I just wanted to take a minute to take a look at that even by Kehoe and NICAP's own admission, Wedemeyer bowed out because he didn't want his name published. And that just seems striking to me in a number of ways. Would anyone like to comment on that or share any thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because it could be one of a few things, but most prominently the idea that he thought his name being attached to this UFO research would upset his career as a major general. But then you have the other option, which is that he wanted to be sort of a silent partner in the NICAP organization, which I think is, I mean, there's obviously not going to be a smoking gun for that, but I think the fact that so many OPC people were kind of lurking around sort of makes that a bit more prominent. And like, he didn't want his name public, and a lot of the people you've covered in this book didn't exactly have the most prominent names in the NICAP board. I mean, they were on the NICAP board, but it wasn't like their names were out there and circulating all over the place. This is a bit more extreme. So it would be kind of like if, I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track there, or you at least understand my thinking, in that these are influential career intelligence officers. They're not clerks at that New Orleans FBI field office like we took a look at in another chapter. But these are one person removed from the president, career office, intelligence officers. And if something would hurt your career, you decline. You don't do it, especially if it is recreational. Like I find that really difficult to even entertain with some of these people. But you're correct, there's not a smoking gun per se.
I think you're right too, in that these people would be well aware of like the vetting process, and the fact that involvement in this group would have been known whether their name was public or not. And if it was a threat to like national security, it would have been, or perceived as such, it would have been something addressed whether his name was public or not. So I think that raises more questions in that regard.
Yeah, like we're about to come across again where Fahrney bails, so Kehoe knows Hillenkoetter from the academy, so he, as the story goes, says, hey, you want to sit on the board of my UFO organization? And good old Roscoe says, yeah, sure, why not? And does it. And people like Todd Zeckel, and I cite his argument because I think it is a pretty good representation of the UFO community at large and what they like to think about NICAP. His take is it was cool to invite Hillenkoetter because Hillenkoetter was one of the good guys, but Kehoe chased off the bad guys. But whoops, he let Brian in because Brian was a wolf in sheep's clothing that lied to him about believing UFOs were interplanetary vehicles. So Kehoe mistakenly thought that indicated Brian was a good guy. And Zeckel deems himself able to properly assess who was good and who was bad and what their intentions were. But Zeckel never addresses, that I'm aware of, Wedemeyer. And there's a point, it's just absurd. It's just absurd to even try to do mental backflips over why this was a good grassroots movement, in my opinion. But I encourage alternative takes or whatever take anyone might like to express. Would anyone else care to read?
I have a question, comment.
Sure.
How would Carl Jung have ended up involved? Anybody ever looked into that?
They solicited statements. They were very effective. That's another reason I felt like that it was operated by people like de Roquefort that knew how the government worked. Their committees and like membership drives and things were very effective. And they wrote people and they solicited them to be board members to make comments, to give them public statements and things like that. And I'm sure sometimes they got unsolicited letters as well. In Erica Lutz's archive, her physical archive she has, there's a letter from Carl Jung to NICAP. I don't think it's this exact one, but she has one. And are you sharing a link there, Jeff, to Jung's letters?
To a paper that was in the Journal of Jungian Scholarly Studies by a guy named Matthew Fike, that's called Jung's Letters to Major Donald Kehoe. And so it's a paper that addresses the communications and letters they sent back and forth to each other.
Thank you.
I think it's also worth noting that, I mean, this is a bit more of a tangential connection. Jung was interested in the flying saucer mystery, but he was also friends with Alan Dulles of the CIA to the point where he was treating, I think, Dulles's mistress, spy mistress. Can you back me up on that?
I'm not sure. When you first brought that up, I thought of Dr. Wolf, that I think was at Cornell, that treated Dulles's son with brain damage, and Wolf was very instrumental in MK Ultra. And I think, like, what I think we're getting at is Dulles had a personal interest in some of these topics and pursuing them.
Yeah.
But please continue.
Well, I just think it's interesting that even when you solicit a letter from a renowned psychoanalyst, they're also 1 degree removed from, at that point, a future director of the CIA, past and future. What year are we in now?
57. Who would like to read starting at "In Statements Published by United Press"? Please.
I'll read.
Thank you, Sharon.
In statements published by United Press in January 1957, Fahrney fully threw the Air Force under the bus. He said UFO reports were declining because they go out into Air Force files and never come out. Fahrney added, the Air Force deals with such reports with skepticism and ridicule, making people reluctant to come forward. He blamed the circumstances for contributing to the need to form NICAP. The reason the Air Force doesn't put out any information, of course, is because the visitors must not be from the Earth. Therefore, they must be from some other part of the universe. Fahrney was further quoted. The obvious question then is, where are they from and why are they here? And the Air Force can't answer, so they say nothing. In a February 1957 director's report to the Board of Governors, Kehoe stated NICAP could easily become a tremendous success. We may surmise such success was primarily defined by swaying popular opinion, or what UFO organizations tend to questionably describe as educating the public. Kehoe noted in the report that Fahrney's statements were carried widely. The news story, Kehoe added, was repeated on radio, television, and other mediums, including flying saucer magazines, published both domestically and abroad. Kehoe was pleased with Admiral Fahrney's aggressiveness, but the Major's use of Fahrney as a noteworthy and inspired figurehead was short-lived. Fahrney soon resigned as board chairman, and rumors spread he was forced by the Navy to quit. From an April 1957 special bulletin signed by Kehoe, which is printed below, it took Kehoe little time to secure a new board chairman, Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter. The former director of the CIA was indeed an impressive addition. Any number of aspects of the Hillenkoetter and NICAP saga are worthy of exploration, and a winding story spanning decades and involving a cloak and dagger myth about crashing flying saucers is certainly among them. Let's begin our look of this intriguing plotline with a review of events as documented by Adam Go-Rightly and others.
If I might interrupt you for just a moment there, please, Sharon. And that reference is to Adam Go-Rightly's book, Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, which is a recommended nonfiction book. And there's an accompanying documentary that he put out as well that some folks might enjoy. And please continue reading.
In 1981, a now infamous researcher by the name of Bill Moore was working on a book project. The same Bill Moore who, in his 1979 book, speculated Townsend Brown was involved in Morris Jessup's tale of an epic experiment in Philadelphia gone haywire, as considered earlier. The working title of Moore's potential 1981 offering was, how would you
Magic 12.
Just called Magic 12?
Yeah.
So, MAJIK-12, Magic 12. It was a never published fictional account of the supposedly real Majestic 12, aka MJ12, as based upon quite dubious information provided by Richard
Doty.
Okay.
Yeah.
The MJ12 were allegedly an extremely secret group of a dozen individuals purported to be charged with overseeing the retrieval of crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft. Moore and his fellow researchers speculated about the identities of the 12, whose project was, of course, not verified to exist. Moore then reportedly provided the names to Doty in the possible hope of obtaining confirmation. 3 years later, in 1984, Moore's research partner, Jamie Chandera, reportedly received an anonymously mailed package. It contained a 35 millimeter roll of film with photos of what became known as the MJ12 papers, a set of unauthenticated documents supposedly confirming identities and activities of the MJ12. Moore's previous speculation about identities of the MJ12 appeared to be accurate, at least if you put any faith in the dubious docs. The MJ12 papers are now widely considered fraudulent for many reasons and are, at absolute best, unverified.
Thanks, Sharon. Let's hang on there, please, and open the floor for any comments. That's a very deep and winding story that I've tried to put into just a few paragraphs. As I say, people like Go-Rightly have written entire books surrounding a lot of the events, and people that got drawn into them. Any thoughts on any of that, guys?
I love that Sharon does not know who Richard Doty is, nor what the MJ12 documents are.
It is refreshing to a certain extent. One of the things that I've learned and interacting with, the rest of the world and Sharon's book group, sometimes when I'll tell them about things that I've learned around spooks and UFOs, they'll seem kind of like it's a platitude. Like, well, yeah, I can see that. And where it's more of a big deal if you're in circles that argue about it, you know? And like Sharon, you probably don't find it surprising in the least that a bunch of guys are mailing documents around that are probably fraudulent, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah,
I
right.
figured. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to go back to the quote from Fahrney about the Air Force doesn't put out any information because the visitors must not be from the Earth, therefore they must be from some other part of the universe. That is quite a statement.
Quite a leap.
Like, wow. And this is like right at the beginning of NICAP. I was astounded by that, considering some of the stuff we've talked about before about, at times they say all the right things, like we don't know what the phenomenon is, so we want to investigate it, but they were certainly jumping to some conclusions here.
Absolutely. It's dumbfounding when you gain a little bit of understandings. When I gained a little bit of understandings of how the scientific process worked. And that is one of the things that makes me less tolerant of some of even today, the academics that get in this field. I don't know if they like the attention they get. I don't know if they like being the go-to person from media outlets that know they can count on them to say absurd things. I don't know if they're just trying to raise funding dollars, looking for angel donors. I don't know, but it is astounding that like Avi Loeb, for instance, can try to build rational statements around a rock flying through the solar system might be an interplanetary spacecraft. Yeah, I mean, it could be, but the information that's required to think that's the likely thing to be talking about, it does become a platitude that we're even discussing. Like I can, Steve Long had said last week, the stigma is deserved. A lot of times it is that, like, if we're going to get out absurd statements and dissect why they're wrong, yeah, then it does begin to, you start wondering at what point is it silly and am I doing more harm than I'm preventing by even bringing attention to these things. Like sometimes I use that SNL skit of passing around the spoiled milk as an analogy of, oh, this is awful, taste it. And, everybody at the kitchen table keeps passing around the milk and drinking it. Sometimes you wonder where to just let something go and don't even bring attention to it. And it is fascinating in itself that military officers, high-level intelligence personnel, for whatever reasons, continue to give this subject credibility and make statements propping it up for whatever multiple reasons it happens. Like that's kind of worthy of research and investigation in itself, you know.
Yes.
I'll read for a bit. Let me check this. Okay. Perhaps the whole Moore Doty bit involved unsavory goings-ons, or as Go rightly put it, a feedback loop. A good argument can sure be made. After all, the story and names Moore gave the infamously unreliable Doty are what landed in the mailbox, apparently. At any rate, Admiral Hillenkoetter turned up among the alleged MJ-12. Besides the fact Moore had already named Hillenkoetter, his inclusion was inevitable in a UFO mythology kind of way. He headed the CIA from 1947 to 1950 in the wake of the alleged Roswell crash of the summer of 47. So he could hardly not be in on the supposed crash retrievals. That might especially be the case considering the story was being told by a guy, Moore, who purported to subscribe to the Roswell crash story. Also named in the MJ-12 papers as an alleged member of the group, along with Hillenkoetter, was Dr. Donald H. Menzel, an astronomer and astrophysicist. And I'll give you a shot of him here. The good Dr. Menzel. Menzel was critical of views promoted by NICAP, earning a book he authored a place as a reference as a recommended skeptical view in the abstract of the NICAP 1964 cornerstone publication, The UFO Evidence. As a matter of fact, Menzel was so adamant in his position UFOs could be conventionally explained that some later suspected his 1980s inclusion in the alleged MJ-12 was a joke among the hoaxers of the documents. The FBI provided 5 PDF files totaling over 200 pages in response to my FOIA request on Donald Howard Menzel. After follow-up, the Bureau notified me of 3 more potentially responsive files transferred to the National Archives. What these paragraphs go on to explain is that Dr. Menzel was involved with classified research for the Navy. He was cleared multiple times for work in classified areas. He had a long career and was repeatedly cleared and allowed to work. And there are hundreds of pages that I continue to receive from NARA from that FOIA request. We just got some recently, in fact, that were posted at Expanding Frontiers Research. That, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to mention, reminds me a bit too of Wedemeyer, that Zeckel and the UFOs community's painting of Hillenkoetter and people like that is kind of counter-establishment when it comes to UFOs. It's certainly not supported in the FBI records responsive to General Wedemeyer. He was repeatedly cleared for work on presidential advisory committees and believed to be trustworthy and of high esteem as graded by the FBI and the intelligence community. Now, one of the things that I thought people might find interesting about these Menzel files are that after a lifetime of service, the FBI considered asking him to act as a literal, quote, double agent, unquote. In 1974, there is a memo we got from the Boston field office to the FBI director, noting that they were involved in regular meetings with Menzel about his activities, and particularly his travels to China to attend conferences. And if the subject is cooperative, no affirmative steps will be taken during the initial interview to direct his activities, but a separate communications will be directed to the Bureau setting forth the results of the interview and requesting authority to recontact the subject as a potential security informant or double agent. And you can note that's December 74. And then in February, so a couple months later, they informed the director that Menzel had said that he was more than willing to discuss matters relating to the Bureau's internal security responsibilities. He was cooperative, but pointed out he has been interviewed recently by the CIA concerning his PRC trip, the People's Republic of China. So I thought that was kind of amusing as well, that the CIA kind of beat the FBI to it. But I think that also clearly establishes like it hasn't already been done, establishes intelligence community interest in the people traveling these circles. And that's why there's interest, counterintelligence operations, and giving him information to intentionally leak to the Chinese and asking him what the Chinese told him, and so on and so forth. Thoughts, anyone?
Well, it kind of makes sense. What we talked about earlier in the book too, like if the U.S. was interested in people who were going overseas, then it would also be of interest to the U.S. of people who were overseas coming to the U.S. Like we talked about, I think, was it Carvalho who was involved with Mayor Baba?
Yeah.
As a pilot. So it kind of makes sense, kind of works both ways, I guess.
Yeah, it would, wouldn't it? It would. And you never know how important things are. And it just gets really how important those observations may or may not be. And I think everyone would agree it gets pretty crazy. Like we were talking about in Sharon's book group that and I think we've talked about here too, that 1950s CIA aspects of it were just insane, just absolutely crazy. And I'm sure there's a lot of historians that would say, have you checked them lately? Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say one of the kind of conspiracies about Donald Menzel out there, besides for being attached to MJ-12, is that Stanton Friedman, for one, has suggested that he was put up to write in his books by the Psychological Strategy Board, which there's no truth whatsoever to. Like, in fact, the timeline doesn't even work out. He had started working on his book like beforehand. And in fact, the actual story is his boss, Howard Shipley, had put him onto the debunking. I guess Howard Shipley had he was really big on wanting to debunk various pseudosciences, and so he assigned Menzel UFOs. He assigned, I think, like Bart Bach. I think he gave him like astrology or something, and gave a couple of other people in the departments other kind of pseudosciences to address. And Menzel got UFOs and started writing the book about it. And the whole idea is that he was put up by, you know, the spooks, the intelligence agencies, to write these books to debunks. Doesn't really pan out when you look into the facts.
There's a lot that's interesting about Friedman that's not typically discussed. Yeah. To give y'all a brief summary that I could understand if just your heads are spinning with all this different stuff. There were a handful of guys in the 80s that became known as like the go-to authorities on the Roswell crash. And Bill Moore was one of them for a while until he wasn't. And Stanton Friedman remained one pretty much throughout his life. And one of the things that we came across that was interesting about Friedman's FBI records after he died, and we got his records, was the FBI had an interest in how he knew file numbers to request. And like that was one of the things is that makes it difficult to seek some of this information. I've run into it with the National Archives. You pretty much have to have a referral of what file number you're looking for. Like, you rarely get positive responses if you just ask for a topic like from the National Archives, or it'll be like generic, here's something that was released before. But the FBI indicated that in records we obtained, and they're on the Wix blog, you can locate them on Friedman, that he asked for specific FBI file numbers that involved the topic of UFOs. And they weren't really concerned about the material. I think they even gave it to him or redacted it for a while. And then, you know, in typical Friedman style, he played it up like completely, like any pushback he got from the government, he presented as indicative of the big UFO cover-up. But the FBI did have an interest in how did he know what to ask for. And that was concerning in that, like in the NICAP vein, someone had to tell him what to request. And that's the kind of thing I find interesting.
Well, he had his own deep throat for the cosmic Watergate.
There you go.
That's what I think of every time I think of Stanton Friedman. Is there's this old cartoon of him that appeared in Saucer Smear. He's riding the little flying saucer and he's going cosmic Watergate.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and Friedman used to proclaim absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And as I was just kind of, you know, describing about Avi Loeb, that's exactly what absence of evidence is.
That's also like something I've heard like a creationist like Ken Ham say, you know, in like a debate. It's very interesting that that's put into UFOs, an inherently spiritual religious movement.
Yeah, yeah.
Readers may find it somewhat amusing that a 1949 FBI memo noted a confidential informant provided information indicating Menzel lunches in New York City at the Metropolitan Club with Admiral Chester Nimitz. The Admiral's namesake is the USS Nimitz, a Navy vessel now known around the UFO genre due to its involvement in the celebrated 2004 Tic Tac case. For better or worse, the promotion of the 2004 UFO case in 2017 by the New York Times and To the Stars Academy pretty much bears full responsibility for the otherwise shelved story's revived lease on life. History buffs might also take interest that in 1942, Admiral Nimitz was relayed analysis of Japanese messages that had been intercepted and successfully decrypted, enabling the U.S. Navy to secure a major victory at Midway. The circumstances changed the entire course of war in the Pacific, according to page 7 of a CIA study.
Thank you, Randy. And this is that page 7 of that CIA study that explains how there were Japanese signals intercepted and decrypted, evaluated, and given in time to Admiral Nimitz to enable the U.S. Navy to win a major strategic victory at Midway. A similar action mounted by the CIA resulted in President Kennedy's successful handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis in October '62. And I thought this was kind of interesting, not just because of the USS Nimitz and Admiral Nimitz history, as the USS Nimitz is featured prominently in one of the cases involved in the dubious 2017 New York Times article on UFOs, but also because this kind of is dancing around our discussions about and reference to James Carrion's work about UFOs as a code breaking tool. And I thought this was kind of interesting, you know, the obvious priority that's put on intercepting and decrypting or decoding messages. And just, I thought this was interesting, this other paragraph I highlighted, where they name major threats to truly efficient intelligence, that there's at least 5 possible major threats. Infiltration by a rival security service, loss of morale, loss of secrecy, political interference, and bureaucracy. I thought that's kind of interesting. Please continue reading, Randy.
Sure. The FBI files on Dr. Menzel suggest a close association with Dr. Harlow Shapley was consistently among the Bureau's deepest concerns during the 1940s, however warranted it may or may not have been. Menzel and Shapley were employed in the astronomy department at Harvard. Despite their apparent strong differences on certain academic issues, Bureau memos suggest Menzel respected Shapley and defended his right to his opinion. Like Menzel, Shapley was also the subject of an FBI security investigation. Somewhat interestingly, Shapley's apparent take on extraterrestrials would later be portrayed in NICAP literature. In a NICAP brochure within a section titled Published Statements on the Question of Other Worlds, the first entry reads, Dr. Harlow Shapley, former director of Harvard Observatory. We must now accept it as inevitable that there are other worlds with some kind of thinking beings. A 1949 report on Menzel contained in the Bureau files indicates a confidential informant stated Menzel and Edward U. Condon shared a mutual contact. As previously mentioned, Condon would go on to lead an Air Force Commission study of UFOs, producing in 1969 what became widely known as the Condon Report. The study was a big disappointment to NICAP, in what by now should be no surprise at all One individual in the professional circles described by the informant was noted in the FBI report to already be the subject of a then current security investigation. It might be easier to find people not under investigation. What took you so long, indeed? In August 2020, I had an email exchange with James Carrion in which he shared some images of Roscoe Hillenkoetter letters. Carrion stated the source of the material was a Bill Moore archive. One of the intriguing images, apparently depicting a copy of a letter authored by Hillenkoetter and once in Moore's possession, is shown on the following page. Yet another image, shared by Carrion, showed a hard copy of a 1963 letter from Hillenkoetter to Dr. Menzel. Across the top of the page was a boilerplate message suggesting the copy was initially printed by the American Philosophical Society Library.
Thanks, Randy. Let me share a couple images here with you guys. That are intriguing, I think. This first one is from James Carrion, said it was in a Bill Moore archive and shared it with me. And something really interesting is we can see along the bottom that Bill Moore and or his associates were apparently studying Roscoe Hillenkoetter's signature. And so a real key point there, I don't think we'd ever be able to know, but these were documents that people were suspected of forging, these MJ12 papers, and they had memos and signatures from Roscoe Hillenkoetter in them. So a telltale sign, so to speak, would be if Bill Moore and company were studying Hillenkoetter's signature and the date group of memos after they received the MJ12 papers or before they claimed to receive them would indeed be an interesting thing to know for sure, would it not?
Jack, do you know, did James say who had some of these Moore archives in possession? Do we know who has those?
I would contact Carrion to inquire about that. Okay. I believe that it was material that he copied from his days with MUFON. He's recently shared some NICAP stuff with me that I shared some of it with the group in an email, I think, and I'll be sharing some more for folks publicly soon as well. But I would inquire to James about any further records he might have on Moore if they have not been published. And this, along those lines, Steve, I had similar interests. And this is another document he shared with me that was Hillenkoetter and Menzel exchange. And I could see, I highlighted this, it was not highlighted across the top, that it was from the American Philosophical Society Library. And that is a nonprofit in Oregon. And I found they were still open and I was able to contact them. And that's what the final section of the chapter is about, is records obtained from them about a Menzel and Hillenkoetter exchange that takes us into a kind of another can of worms. So before I go on through that, does anyone have any further questions about Bill Moore's scribbling or someone scribbled on Billmore's papers or related questions.
Questions about Billmore. Where do I start, Jack?
I hear you. I hear you. All three of them. I mean, Shandera, Doty, four of them. Friedman. There's a lot of unanswered questions about them. And I don't think anyone in this group would argue with me that the UFO topic almost serves as a distraction to not ask those questions, to like not aim our attention at how did this happen and where did this happen and where did this guy go and all of these kinds of questions. Like Rachel and I were discussing last week, that if we're just perpetually arguing about a UFO cover-up that doesn't even make sense in the first place, then we never get around to asking, was Billmore studying Hillenkoetter's signature before or after he got documents supposedly signed by Hillenkoetter? It's a pretty relevant question, you know?
Absolutely.
Which, you know, perhaps I'll be hearing from Billmore's attorneys for even posing, you know.
Well, at least someone will have heard from him then, Jack.
True enough. True enough.
I think a lot of
Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
I think a lot of the Billmore stuff that like MUFON had at one point is actually on their Project Aquarius website, and you can just like go download it. I don't know if it contained that specific material. The only other thing I was going to mention is that Donald Menzel himself actually saw a UFO that he could not explain back in 1949 near Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico, in fact. So he was a UFO witness.
Interesting. Something else I'll throw in too, a little trivia thing. Once again, a shout out to Unger and Den of Spies. I did not know the USS Nimitz was part of the failed hostage rescue attempt launched by Jimmy Carter in 1980. That the Nimitz, if I remember his description of it correctly, carried some of the helicopter aircraft that tried to go into Tehran, and some had to turn back and then some crashed. And ill-fated mission, yeah, the USS Nimitz was the aircraft carrier involved in that. So it has quite the story and history going.
It was also, of course, prominently featured in the 1984 movie The Final Countdown, which kind of married science fiction themes like the Philadelphia experiment and what later went on to be the Montauk Tales, right? It's kind of another interesting little connection there.
That is interesting. Back in the day, did Morris Jessup and his clan claim that they knew anything about the Nimitz? Was that the ship they claimed to have been getting stories about?
No, their claims were about a ship called the Eldridge. And the movie, I kind of forget the Final Countdown's plot, but it basically was the story that was later appropriated by the guys that started pressing the Montauk Tales about time travel and how during the Philadelphia experiment there was something that went wrong, and you know, one or two guys traveled through time. So it kind of built on the movie script. Within a couple of years, you had people like Nichols and his cronies, pushing this story, which was exactly like the movie plot that had just come out a couple years before. But they were saying that it was all real and it was about them, essentially.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, I think we do have time to wrap the chapter up. I'll read here. I soon discovered the library to currently be in operation and rather easily accessible. An email from the reference staff confirmed the original 1963 Hillenkoetter Menzel letter is, in fact, an authentic item housed at the facility. The letter is located in a Hillenkoetter folder within a Donald Menzel collection. The folder consists of 10 pages that include letters exchanged between the two and dated from 1961 to 1965. The American Philosophical Society Library provided a PDF of the folder, and you can find that link in the YouTube video description. The letters exchanged with Hillenkoetter reflect Menzel's skeptical position on UFOs and his concerns about NICAP. The doctor expressed his interpretation NICAP was undermining authority, while its personnel had tendencies to make much more of UFO reports than was justified. He was firmly in opposition to NICAP trying to persuade the government to take up the cause of UFO activism. Congress, Menzel suggested, should be investigating NICAP instead of UFOs. Hillenkoetter sat on the NICAP Board of Governors from 1957 until his resignation in 1962. Most of the letters were therefore written after the Admiral's NICAP stint. In a 1963 letter to Menzel, Hillenkoetter wrote, "I resigned from NICAP about 20 months ago, feeling that it had degenerated from an organization honestly trying to find out something definite about possible unknowns into a body bickering about personalities. The Air Force, too, could have helped by not being so secretive." Hillenkoetter, in my estimation, maintained a commitment to portraying himself rather graciously to the unwavering Menzel, a strategy we might not find particularly surprising of a man of his experience and travels. In that same 1963 letter, Hillenkoetter stated, "Thank you very much for your book. To my mind, it was very well done, and I enjoyed it and found it of great interest. I should say that you have effectively put to rest all surmises about flying saucers being from outer space. You have done a thorough and praiseworthy job. There is, however, a somewhat interesting discrepancy that arises. It becomes apparent to Menzel that Hillenkoetter seems to express a different stance on UFOs to Kehoe than he communicates to Menzel. The situation further inflames Menzel's ongoing prodding of Hillenkoetter to publicly denounce NICAP and UFOs. In a 1965 edition of NICAP's The UFO Investigator, the magazine cites and challenges Menzel's assertion that Hillenkoetter accepts Menzel's explanations for UFOs. And I'll share that material here. What we have is a public brouhaha to some extent that comes up. And basically, Menzel finds Hillenkoetter talking out of both sides of his mouth. This is in the NICAP publication, The UFO Investigator, in 1965. It proclaims that Admiral Hillenkoetter denies the Menzel claim. And they state that Menzel claimed Hillenkoetter read his book and thought that it was good and that it explained UFOs, and goes on to say Dr. Menzel's statement apparently was an attempt to discredit NICAP, and they challenged the authenticity of Menzel's statements. They go on to publish a letter, January 1965, from Hillenkoetter to Kehoe, where Hillenkoetter claimed he has never carried on any conversation with Menzel about NICAP or UFO. He did send me a copy of his book, for which I thank him, but took no position on the statements he made. And this is published by NICAP in 1965. Along with this, they say that Menzel may have confused Hillenkoetter with someone else, but now that Menzel is repeating his claim, they took it to Hillenkoetter personally, and Hillenkoetter denies it and has always strongly supported NICAP policies. So these are in the archive in Oregon, the Philosophical Society, that I would say Menzel kept this exchange and had it in a collection for this very purpose of defending his honor about this issue. And he encloses a copy of the article. He also reminds Hillenkoetter that you seem to have forgotten the letter that you wrote me, and I'm enclosing with statements about my book and about NICAP. Menzel goes on to tell Hillenkoetter that Kehoe's statement over the radio that you had not really changed your views on UFOs. Menzel thinks that statement should be challenged. And of course, Menzel doesn't like being made out to be at best, confused person, if not a liar in this circumstance.
It's funny, Jack, just listening, it reminds me of kind of some of the back and forth that goes on recently between Kirkpatrick and Gallaudet, and also Brendan Fugel. I wasn't at the meeting. Oh, I was, but I didn't realize it was that. And, I don't know who's misremembering and who's lying and stuff, but it's funny, the parallels there.
Yeah, it is. It is funny. And I also think it's relevant that like we've said, for whatever reasons, this was a former director of the CIA. And he's encouraging Donald Kehoe to continue rah-rah UFOs, and Hillenkoetter's on board, while he's telling Menzel, yeah, what a bunch of craziness. I was glad to get out of that organization. So take that for what it may or may not mean to you. And as Jeff and I have discussed on social media to some extent, at a bare minimum, this shows that Hillenkoetter wasn't nearly as enthusiastic about UFOs as he's popularly portrayed to be. And it does become somewhat of a platitude, as we talked about earlier, but it shouldn't be overlooked that if the MJ12 papers claim that Hillenkoetter and Menzel worked together on a top secret, ultra top secret crash retrieval program, that some people to this day still continue to subscribe to and argue the validity of those documents. This letter exchange clearly shows that that would have been news to these two men.
Well, if nothing else, it makes me want to read Menzel's book. Has anybody read it? Is it good?
You'd think I would have, but I haven't. No.
There's actually a few that he's written on flying saucers. There's one literally just called Flying Saucers, and that was the 1953 one. And there's like the World of Flying Saucers, and I think that's the one he did with another guy, Lyle Boyd, I think. So yeah, there's a few that he did on flying saucers, and he had written articles in magazines, kind of debunking flying saucers, like putting forth like mirage theories and like plasma theories and stuff like that he had written. So he put out quite a bit about UFOs for several years, anyways.
Cool.
Yeah, as you
He does address NICAP directly in the world of flying saucers, I believe, which is, I think, where maybe the most interesting tidbits will come from, given this little snafu. As I don't one of the letters I actually called it that, which I found funny.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, as you point out, they were involved with MJ12 and all this nonsense in 1947, but yet in these letters that were written in the 60s, they clearly don't seem to have much knowledge about this kind of stuff. And you bring up in the book exactly how, like, unless the idea was that these letters are basically hoaxes that were meant to be found by future researchers in the future that, for whatever reason. And it reminds me of the Bob Jacobs Big Sur missile case. And this is where supposedly a UFO like used lasers to shoot down a missile during a missile test. And for years, we never had seen the video for this. Well, eventually a copy of the video was located in the National Archives, and Arrow dug it up. And so now that we see the video, we see there's nothing like a UFO flying around, shooting down a UFO. And one of the theories that people have kind of pushed back, I wrote a big thread on how basically we can conclusively debunk that case. Well, the conspiracy theorists came back. Well, they just shot another missile launch back then to fake it and put this video in there. I'm like, wait a second. So they went through a whole other missile launch that involved, downrange assets, like hundreds of miles away. They did a whole nother test. They convinced probably thousands of people that the other one never happened, just so they could hide a video, just in case this guy 16 years later decided to write a National Enquirer article about it. And then decades after that, somebody eventually found a copy of it in the National Archives unexpectedly, and then we got it. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd to think that they faked this stuff in the past just so future researchers might find it and cause confusion.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's a good point. And thanks for emphasizing my point with it. Tanner, did I cut you off? Did you have more you wanted to add about NICAP there?
Mm-mm. Kind of in response to Jeff's point, though. Sorry, since you asked, I'll jump in.
Sure.
that kind of thinking is already being injected into the current releases. I don't know if you saw it. I haven't heard the discussion last week, but I look forward to hearing what you guys thought of the revelations in scare quotes. Burchett, the congressman, is already sort of prepping his audience to swallow the idea that there will be fake things in the upcoming release, which seems to defeat the purpose of everything that they've been working towards so diligently for nearly a decade at this point. I don't know. It just it never ends.
Well, where they're headed with it, am I correct that like the Burchett Luna team, that side, where they're headed with it is it's demonic and Satan's trying to fool us, right? Isn't that basically where we're going with this as far as Burchett and Luna are concerned?
I think it's possibly even more nefarious because I'm seeing Luna recently has been trying to do like an MK Ultra hearing. Don't know why. Doesn't seem like uh I think MK Ultra was as much of an atrocity as the next guy. But uh, I don't think Luna seems that particularly knowledgeable of what it actually was. They're not really public about which whistleblowers are coming forward. And I think the fact that there's been all this like kayfabe about like missing documents and it was canceled because whistleblowers were threatened. Uh, it's like intentionally sort of making MK Ultra into the UFO thing, which I mean the topics do have overlaps, but MK Ultra is very real, and like you want to talk about the deep state, that was the actual deep state, but they're trying to turn it into the imaginary deep states that is behind the UFO controversy.
Luna, I agree with you. She does not seem particularly knowledgeable about MK Ultra. I don't think a person would present the records in the ways she has. She would not describe alleged MK Ultra records the ways she has described them if she had a knowledge of the history and the publication of records, and that like any American citizen can order CDs of the MK Ultra collection, that she would need to describe them as newly released documents or newly found records that like nobody's going to be confiscating your MK Ultra disc, you know.
And are these files going to be just like these last ones that we got? The same MK Ultra files, just perhaps a higher resolution scan, which, is still nice, but it's not, is it going to be new materials?
Yeah.
No. Well, famously, all of the materials were burned. And I'm not sure if Luna is aware of that. It wouldn't surprise me if she wasn't, because she thought the members of the Warren Commission were still alive. I also suspect that
she doesn't seem to be. No, please continue.
I also suspect that some of her whistleblowers, because I mean, I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I worry that some of her whistleblowers are like the Kathy O'Brien, like monarch stuff that gets into like the super soldier program interlocks, and that's sort of what I mean when I say like it's nefarious to move that topic into. I mean, it's already been done. It was done in the 90s, done probably in the 80s as well, and it's continued into the present. But to do it in this level seems to me particularly damaging. to the subject.
I encourage everyone to look at her background, her personal background, and not to look at this in terms of UFO, but to look at it in terms of what would be the takeaway, not about UFOs, but trust in the government by this action. Would this shape narratives that you can't trust the government, another administration was holding something back, etc., to try to reshape history or reshape the future? For what reason, who knows? But I think that's likely.
I would not doubt that at all.
So that you have to wait to see what happened as a result, not necessarily the information, but did it increase trust or decrease trust?
Yeah, and in who and in what specific context. Yeah.
Yeah, great points, Sharon. And Jeff last week had brought up how the UFO files that were released not only were old, but they had been mandated to be released years ago under the Biden administration, right? And here is the Trump administration coming out and saying that administration can't be trusted. We're the ones bringing you the disclosure, right? It's just a blatant lie, completely disingenuous. And that should certainly color the entire thing.
Yeah.
And it's clearly just been about, the government's literally been bragging about their view count on these numbers. They're over 1 billion view counts now, and like it's like a media thing for them. It's like PR. Like while they spend this whole time bragging about how they're the most transparent presidency in history and blah blah blah, and it's like, meanwhile, we're not really getting a whole lot actually out of this administration, and what we are wasn't even mandated from this administration in the first place for the most part.
Yeah, Steve Long made a good point about that last week, that the rollout of the records wasn't even done in a way that would help researchers access and work with the records. It was done as if PR were the primary issue. Yeah.
And I find it funny how one of the main things I see a lot of people on Twitter and social media saying is, now that it's been kind of exposed that the documents are not new, and I think mentioned this last week a bit, is that, but it's on an official government website, and everybody's so excited to finally see these documents on an official government website like war.gov. Even though they're not new, that somehow changes the message because they're now on war.gov, like they're somehow more important, or they're more, I don't know, credible than what we previously had. But the thing is, a lot of these files were previously on government websites like FBI.gov, the vault, or the NARA website. So, or they came from the government via FOIA. Like, what difference does it make that it was thrown up on war.gov? That doesn't really change anything.
Right. Good points all. I'll finish up these final few paragraphs and complete chapter 8, and then we'll finish up our discussion. Perhaps no one has been cited to bolster NICAP relevance and credibility more than former Director of Central Intelligence, Admiral Hillenkoetter. His statements in support of the extraterrestrial hypothesis and saucer mystery were emphasized by NICAP and continue to this day to be frequently promoted among UFO enthusiasts appealing to authority. Trouble is, those quoted statements may not thoroughly reflect Hillenkoetter's actual views and evolving perspectives, if the quotes are even completely authentic in the first place. They certainly do not accurately represent his apparent contradicting statements or the context of the battles waged to win his public endorsements. There are clearly implications to the MJ-12 hoax and a lack of evidence pertaining to the UFO mystery contained in the Hillenkoetter-Menzel letters. Whatever classified projects about which these men may have shared knowledge, retrieving crashed saucers was obviously not among them. Unless, of course, the two intended their letters to later be examined as part of a ruse to dupe future researchers into thinking they knew nothing about saucers, in which case they were sure playing the long game. If Hillenkoetter did consider himself to have any significant knowledge of classified evidence of UFOs, he didn't seem to have a lot of conviction about it. Perhaps knowledge he may have had about the exploitation of the topic for deceptive purposes was another story. The behavior of the former DCI might particularly be considered intriguing in light of his awareness of the relationship the agency had with the Economic Cooperation Administration and, by extension, Council Services. I could reiterate the difficulty in discerning motives of professional intelligence personnel. As is often the case with UFO stories of yesteryear, the trail takes intriguing twists and turns where we find the merging paths of UFO investigators, skeptics, and spies. Something else that comes to mind about Hillenkoetter and the nuggets that we get from James Carrion in his books is, as we've seen repeatedly, the code, intercepting messages and cracking codes was a priority. Carrion hypothesizes that there may have been UFO circumstances created by an American-led international intelligence coalition to use UFOs as a way to crack these codes. And one of the nuggets on that path is that he places Hillenkoetter in a flotilla in the vicinity of Scandinavia during some of the ghost rocket sightings. And that's kind of interesting too, that like Sharon, you were saying about, don't come at it from what about UFOs. Like that would just completely, rattle someone that doesn't know about Carrion's theories that they're creating these UFO events to get coded messages so they can intercept the coded messages and they'll have some ideas about proper nouns that are going to be repeated and things like that, and so on and so forth, where like you'd be like, why in the world would the Navy launch ghost rockets over Scandinavia? And then how does Hillenkoetter have anything to do with it? How does it play out long term over him keeps on yelling, yeah, them UFOs, we got to get to the bottom of that thing, while his professional and public actions more reflect there is like zero concern by the CIA that, UFOs are a threat to anything more than public hysteria. And that's something that we saw too with the ghost rockets per Carrion, is when they were telling the press about these incursions kind of like the drone circumstances, now that we think about it, of more recent times, they're promoting these incursions of unknown rockets, but they're not even calling their officers back from being on leave while they're claiming to be on high alert. And, now we can look more behind the scenes about they're telling the press one thing when other things are actually going on. And Hillenkoetter was indeed a man of many stories and many faces, it would appear. Closing comments, anyone?
H.P. Robertson from the Robertson panel, CIA's Robertson panel report, was also involved with the Foo Fighter cases over, Europe in the 1940s. And this was recently, again, brought up by some people on Twitter, because trying to draw some sort of conspiratorial link that they've had some long-term interest in censoring the topic or something. But it's because Robertson was basically the scientific advisor for SHIAF, just like the Expeditionary Air Force, like in Europe at the time. And so he's on some of those old Foo Fighter reports as well. So some of these guys investigated this stuff even before they were UFOs.
Yeah, when they didn't really even know what to call them yet. Closing comments? Going once? Well, thanks for joining. Go ahead, please.
I waited too long. I think your point about it being sort of an, I guess this is Carry-On's point of it being sort of an international cooperation between the U.S. and its allies is also an important element of this, given, the sort of the history of ufology in not only America, but the UK, France. It all always has a similar sort of, military intelligence people are on the top of the ladder, even when it comes to groups there as well. So I think it is plausible, because even when you're talking about Foo Fighters, I was thinking of Hugh Dowding of the British Air Force, who was sort of interested in all of these topics. I think he was investigating. He was part of the British response to investigating Foo Fighters. He got involved in like the Fairy Investigation Society, a whole bunch of like fringe groups. I think he eventually was an Adamski follower, maybe not follower, but promoter. He invited Adamski to speak throughout the UK. So I think it is plausible.
Yeah, and it depends on the specific era and all. Like some of those ghost rocket reports, the writer of the government document, like the Air Force document, alluded to, like, I'm clearly not read into this. They're not worried about it while they're telling the press it's an emergency and officers aren't even being called back from leave. So I'm just staying out of this one. It's clearly above my pay grade. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have everybody on board. It only takes like a handful of officers. And no, I mean, Navy personnel on any given flotilla aren't going to ask. If they're told to launch something, you're given the coordinates, you double check them, you launch. I mean, you don't question the admiral's intentions and justifications for the order. No.
Jeff, I just wanted to say thanks for the links you've been dropping in the chat. Some of those look really interesting.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for all of your input, Tanner, and thanks to all of you for sharing about your work. And I'm glad to see you here, Randy. Thanks everybody for being here. Thank you for visiting us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. Find the Wayward Sons Book Group playlist on our YouTube channel and browse our Patreon account to find more interesting information and resources. Thank you all very much for joining us, and see you next time.